Welcome to our first roundtable of the Living to 100 Club. We're going to be talking tonight about isolation and seniors and the impact of the COVID quarantine. Before we start, I'd like to introduce our guests. Dr. Peter Kanaris is licensed as a psychologist in New York State, and he's certified as a diplomate in sex therapy. He has served as the public education campaign coordinator for the New York State Psychological Association. He's been featured in live television telecasts, interviewed in newspaper and magazine columns, and is a co-host of an educational video series, Psychology and You. He has been honored several times by the New York State Psychological Association for his contributions to the profession of psychology, and a Psychologist of the Year by the Suffolk County Psychological Association. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Joe.
Dr. Michael Wasserman is president of the California Association of Long-Term Care Medicine. He has devoted himself to serving the needs of seniors for the past 30 years. He served as CEO of Rockport Healthcare Services, co-founded Senior Care of Colorado, which became the largest privately owned primary care geriatric practice in the country, and was president and chief medical officer for GeriMed of California. He is treasurer of the Wish of a Lifetime Foundation and serves as board member for the American Geriatric Society's Foundation for Health and Aging. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
Dr. Ken Druck, his work has, over the past 40 years, has included executive coaching, and consulting, the psychology of men, parent effectiveness, healing after loss, resilience, and most recently, courageous aging. Featured regularly in national and international news, including the Wall Street Journal, Thrive Global, CNN, PBS, HuffPost, and the New York Times, with a quote that Dr. Ken has shaped our worldview of what it means to live honorably, courageously, and purposefully. He has a Ph.D. in clinical psychology from the Fielding Institute and a bachelor's degree from Hofstra University. A rock drummer and lifelong athlete who played in the Senior Olympics. Ken is active in civil politics, environmental causes, and as a community leader in San Diego. Welcome, Ken. Thank you all for joining us. I appreciate your willingness to participate in this roundtable discussion. We're going to be talking about the coronavirus and social isolation in older adults, how they influence one another, and how we as healthcare professionals can help the senior population. According to the National Institute on Aging, over 40% of adults 60 and over report feeling lonely on a regular basis. And older adults are especially vulnerable to persistent loneliness because 28% of them live alone. The double whammy is that COVID is now the single most discussed topic in the healthcare industry, while the epidemic of loneliness goes relatively unaddressed. 79% of all deaths from COVID are in the 65 and over group. That's about 8 out of 10 deaths, which is striking. So I'd like to talk about the incidence of loneliness first. We'll start with that. So we know loneliness is, we say it's a subjective feeling that you're lacking the social connections that you need. So it's very prevalent in older adults. 4 out of 10 report having experienced feelings of loneliness. So the question for my audience is, why is this so prevalent? And how do we normalize conversations about loneliness and provide some ways to properly assess it and treat it? Why are we seeing this epidemic of loneliness in older adults? Anyone would care to jump in first?
Well, I'd be glad to, Joe. I think what we're seeing with older adults is perhaps a more extreme version of what we're experiencing, people are experiencing in our society at large. There's sort of a paradox, I believe, with technology. Technology in many ways has, facilitated connections, social media, other forms of the use of technology has been very positive for people. But I think also technology has decreased our connectedness in a face-to-face sense. You know, if you years gone by, you would call up to get information. You know, you'd speak to a human being. You'd interact with that person. You'd ask questions. Now you've got an electronic menu, and chances are you're talking to a robot on the other side. I think this has been, in so many ways, the trend in our world, in our society. And taking a look at older adults, they've been, I think, if you think of a curve of a normal distribution, they're at the far end of the curve. Normally, we've been, as older adults, more accustomed to having face-to-face relationships. And we're living in a world now where it's less common. You know, so we've got to kind of accommodate to the use of technology in order to make those connections remain. And it's been further compounded, of course, by the pandemic, because now what was already a problem before for older adults who are alone, perhaps a spouse that's deceased, or in circumstances of relative isolation at times. And now we are being advised that in order to remain alive, we have to remain isolated. We have to say physically distant, or what we're calling socially distant is actually physically distant from other people. You know, and our reliance then on being connected is mostly through the use of some form of electronic medium, technology.
Sure. So it is a fact of being alone and being separated due to a lot of the reasons you're talking about, but the feeling itself of feeling like there's something missing in my life and I miss out on this social contact, 4 out of 10. I mean, there's a great loneliness scale that UCLA has put together. You may be familiar with it. It's only got 3 questions. And when these groups are studied, seniors, older adults in the different retirement communities, 40 to 50% are endorsing, you know, at least 2 out of 3 of the items. So there's something that you're right, Peter. I think that it's contributing, a lot of the social changes and environmental changes contributing to being more alone. But there's also that disconnect that seems to be jumping out at us. Yeah.
I think also culturally, in our society in particular, we've moved away from the extended family. And, you know, that's certainly also, I remember as a kid seeing my grandparents quite frequently. Now, I will say for myself, we're close to my grandchildren. We do try to see them a lot, but a lot of families, that's not really possible. There's so many folks who are spread out. And so older adults don't necessarily have their families close by. And then, you know, all the other factors that sort of go in, especially as you get into older adults who have more functional limitations, it becomes very problematic. It's ironic. There's a huge push that we not have older people go into nursing homes or such, but if they're at home by themselves with quote unquote supports around them, they actually might be more prone to isolation. So, you know, I think social isolation was a problem before COVID, and to Peter's point, with COVID, it's become a huge issue, whether it's people living in nursing homes or assisted living facilities, or, you know, look, my parents are in their 80s and I told them at the beginning of March not to leave the house. Yeah. So, you know, I try to talk to them frequently. We certainly can use technology to communicate, but, you know, it's very different being with someone than it is talking to them on Zoom.
Sure.
And I don't think we've begun to comprehend what those differences are and the impact of those differences, and perhaps how to surmount them. I think there's some opportunities that are available with technology that we're going to have to learn to understand. And I'm actually excited to hear Ken talk as a psychologist to maybe give us some solutions or answers to how we can be more connected despite the fact that we're connecting through technology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I love what everyone's saying. and we're all pointing to the same thing. We're standing in a completely new normal. The rules have all changed. The premium on having great communication skills, on being approachable as people, especially if we're living in a community. The premium on those kinds of skills, that kind of willingness and those kinds of abilities has never been greater. And so many seniors don't have those skills, just have no idea how to get their hands and hearts around this new normal, and are grieving the loss. Part of their loneliness is they're grieving the loss of all the sources of companionship and connection and intimacy and family gatherings, simple things that maybe some of us took for granted, and friendships and ability to go out into a social environment. And here we are in an enforced isolation that we know we're a droplet away from being infected and possibly dying, and we have to live with this concern and this vigilance, and yet we don't, we're challenged at this point in time. And I'm hoping a lot of our discussion is going to be about how are we helping people meet those challenges, whether they live in a senior community, whether they're living at home, if there are family members listening right now, what are the things that we need to do to help seniors, people who are suffering from loneliness, and those of us who are feeling that sense of disconnection with our aging parents? What can we do to bridge this gap for as long as, we don't know how long this is going to go on, for as long as it does go on, and bring quality back in whatever way, shape, or form it's possible to our families and to the lives of our aging parents.
Yeah.
We're an aging parent to our own lives.
Well, what you're all saying, I can see, is that the virus itself has compounded what was already kind of I won't say pre-existing condition, that's got the wrong connotation, but it's already been there, right? And as you said, Peter, the virus has compounded the problems with this kind of tendencies towards social isolation. So I had a chance to read about a lot of interesting programs that insurance companies in particular are putting together to reach people in their homes, and they're fascinating. I mean, Humana and Aetna, United Healthcare, just to give you some examples, offering the home visits, of course, healthcare engagement, social engagement, improved diet, nutritional counseling, how to use Zoom and FaceTime when they can help their clients learn how to use FaceTime and Zoom, and that increases their capacity to interact with family members. Food and medication delivery services, connecting to other community resources, shipping meals to those who are food insecure. So good programs. Is this enough? Is this enough? There's probably a lot more. There's probably hundreds of these programs, but is this on the right track? Is this gonna do the trick? What do you think?
It's a good start. I think it's a good start. I think we're all, just even the fact that we're all gathered talking about this, yeah. We're all trying to figure out how we can mobilize our own resources, but how, if you're inside an organization like Humana, who's been trying, every organization that's been trying to reach a market of seniors and their families and the people who caregive for the seniors, they're all naturally migrating to how do we approach people in real time with the real challenges they're facing today. And we're doing that right here, right now. How do we, convening the conversation on loneliness and seniors, and what do we do? Are we just stuck with feeling lonely, or what are the resources? What can we do as individuals? What can we do as family members? If you're listening and you have an aging parent, what could you be doing to empower your mom or dad, or your aging brother or sister, or yourself? So I think it's a time of mobilization, but I think these are great starts on a commercial corporate level. but I think there also need to be community programs, individual programs, all the organizations so roundly represented by all of us. Look at all of us scrambling to figure out how can we do this? How can we really show up to meet these needs?
Yeah, I think it's important to realize that social isolation doesn't exist in a vacuum. I saw yet another study today on one of my favorite topics, which is the value of purpose. And there's really good growing evidence that the greater purpose one has in their life, the lower depression, the lower morbidity, things along those lines. Even cognitive function is impacted by purpose. And so as we look at getting folks engaged socially, if we can find ways of giving them a greater sense of purpose with those programs, I think we will get more bang for our buck.
That's a good point. That's a good point. That's as if we're also helping these individuals to redevelop that motivation to do something for themselves, because you can't wait for others to do it for them. And I always talk about, helping them to build that confidence and build that determination that really they can do something about improving their situation. And purpose is I think, a prime vehicle for doing that. Yeah.
Can I build on that for a second?
Sure.
I want to show off. This is not a commercial for a book. I just want you to see the picture on the cover of my last book.
Yeah.
That's my grandson who was 2 weeks old. That's his hand. That's
Oh,
my
wow.
daughter's hand. And
Oh.
that's my hand in the middle.
Wow.
And raising an aging parent is really, how do we create that sense of purpose in our family? How do we tell our aging parents how we need them? How do we invite them, especially now with COVID, to show up in our lives, in their grandkids' lives? How do we clear the path of conflicts and disagreements or power struggles that we no longer have the luxury of reinforcing? How do we get all that stuff cleaned up, clear the path forward, so that we can give each other an increased sense of purpose as family? You said earlier, and I loved it. I think it's so true that, we have, the extended family has been lost and diluted and spread apart. Look at Peter and I. We both went to Hofstra. I'm in California, he's in New York. I never see him. But,
But do you talk on the phone? Yeah.
Huh?
You talk on the phone?
No, Peter and I actually just met an hour ago.
Oh, we will.
How do we use technology? I love, we have technology programs in San Diego through OASIS, the OASIS organization.
Sure.
Teaching, thousands of people how to use technology, FaceTime, how to use portals, how to access some of this equipment, how to use their computers. And like we're having a meeting now. Why not a family meeting once a month or once every couple of weeks, where we can engage, we can see each other's faces. We don't have to have a mask on. We can, and what do we talk about? Coaching families about how do you create purpose in a conversation? Do you chit chat about, what people did? Oh, I went to the store, or I went to, or how do people drop down into more deeper, more meaningful interactions with one another? How do you ask open-ended questions? So I think the use of technology, but also helping people sharpen their awareness of interpersonal skills and the ability to ask an open-ended question that draws somebody else out, that leads to greater meaning and purpose in a relationship. I think all those things are important.
Yeah, that engagement is so important. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about, Ken, really are skills and independent of our current crisis. These are things that families have always needed. And families vary in how skilled they are in being able to interact, connect, and communicate. I think as we're saying, the use of technology now becomes a necessary tool, because if you think about it, the issue of loneliness for people, as we said before, and particularly seniors, has been there for a long time. By adding the pandemic, certainly I think about the only time in the last century we can actually say that other human beings have become phobic objects. There's a feeling now that if I see another human being, and God forbid I'm close to that human being, I'm in danger. I've got to stay away. You know, as if we're in the forest with bears. I've got to stay away from that other being. And if I should be close, I better be masked up where we can't even see each other.
Yeah.
It's, if you think about it, it's so incredible. All right. So what do we do with that? Well, we try to keep distance. We try to stay outdoors. We try to be masked up. My wife, who has had some health issues, and you know, when she's out, she's double masked and she has a visor on.
Yeah.
So I sent to my family a caption with her picture saying, "People of Earth, I come in peace." And it's just such an incredible time now in that regard. So what do? I think we have to rely on technology to be able to connect with purpose, with other people, with our families. And you know, for many years I've consulted in skilled nursing facilities. And it was originally thought that, well, you know, those old folks there, they can't handle technology. You know, they're dealing with rotary dial phones and the like. Well, what we came to discover was that social media, Facebook and other kinds of platforms were a blessing for seniors there, because now, you know, they're there and maybe they can see their distant family once a season or once a month, or in some instances even once a week. Well, now through the social media, they were able to connect up, interact, and have that feeling of being connected to family and friends, even for some people that they hadn't seen in years, face to face. So, yeah.
An example of a program in our community led by one of our corporate citizens, the president, CEO, and founder of Qualcomm, Irwin Jacobs. And it's 4 days of free programs to help people, seniors, get familiar with technology and see example of what they can do. And it's coaching and it's online and it's free. But I think programs like that, supporting programs like that in our communities, you know, helping programs like this. Joe, you've taken the leadership role here, as you do so often with an important subject, but supporting people like Joe and programs like this that are really, so that thousands more people are getting to watch and think about. We're convening the conversation and helping walk people to resources that can make a difference in their lives.
We are making progress. You're right, Ken. And the whole notion of being open to new technology. I mean, I saw this years ago that nursing home patients are very much welcoming telemedicine and telehealth and being able to look at a screen and talk to and communicate with their doctor. I mean, the staff was opposed to it, yet the patients were very, very much open to it. So I think that's so true, that it is another medium, another vehicle for us to connect and for families to connect. And that's just another way to keep reaching people to avoid that disengagement. You know,
it's interesting that we're living in I keep saying all the time, we're living in a new normal. But if you actually stop and think about it, the population living in that nursing home grew up during a lot of new normals. They grew up during the Great Depression, through World War II, through the Cold War, through if you actually think about what that generation has lived through in terms of change in society, you know, I mean, you know, what televisions were like, what everything. I actually agree with Peter. They'll surprise you in terms of their ability to pick up on anything new. I think change is almost a constant for that group, and maybe we've missed something by not promoting that, recognizing it, highlighting it rather than just assuming, well, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, which just is not true.
Mike, I think if I have the honor of speaking for a lot of different groups now on Zoom, but to different groups, different communities. And it's almost like going in when you talk to kids and you remind them what they know and what they have the power to do. You really empower kids. And it's no different with seniors, especially in senior communities, to remind them. What I'd say is, all of us now are having to summon newfound courage, newfound understanding and faith and patience to adopt to this world and its new normal. And think about all the times, whether it was you becoming a parent, you getting a first job, you enduring the Second World War, you enduring the politics of 2020. Think about all the times that you have had to summon newfound courage and perspective. And here we are again in a world in turmoil. And I want to remind you that you have the ability to do that and to reimagine, to think about what can I do to not only to meet these challenges that I'm facing of isolation, of loneliness, what could I do that's right under my nose? What do I have the power to do, including reaching out to my next door neighbor, including inviting people, if I still live in a community, to a driveway, a COVID distancing mask party once every month. What can I do? And not only that, but what are the opportunities that are laying in wait for me to harvest? Peter, you talked before about families coming together. There are families that I hear are now having Zoom family reunions, and family members haven't seen or spoken to each other in 10 years.
Yes.
And now they're realizing that they want to be closer, that they have found time to catch up on each other's lives.
Yes.
Peter, what's been going on in your life? Joe, how are things going for you? That there's found time, and the technology is allowing them to get closer and become more familiar with one another.
Indeed.
Now, there are some benefits. There is a silver lining to this pandemic. I mean, there are some good things that are coming out of it, and that's one of them, Ken. I agree. Yeah. Well, let me ask about coping skills then, because, as we can imagine, the person who's living alone, maybe no family, not a lot of social support, maybe physical impairments, maybe no transportation. I think that individual is probably prone to a lot of worry and kind of doubts about managing and coping and maybe unrealistic thinking and poor decision making. What do we say to the caregivers? What do we say to the person that's trying to reach out to those individuals who are isolated?
I'm going to jump in here as a geriatrician who's dealt with so many of my patients over the years where these issues have occurred pre-COVID, okay? And the families are concerned. It's a constant struggle from an ethical perspective. And one of my favorite lines is, just because someone's 90 years old doesn't mean that they can't make bad decisions. And it's a challenge, because if you're 20 and you make a bad decision, no one threatens to put you in a nursing home. But if you're 90 and you make a bad decision, all of a sudden your kids are like, well, we got to do something about you. And so there's a balance. And I'm separating folks with cognitive impairment and dementia. That's a different issue. In that population, there are clinical issues at play, and there are things we really have to do for their protection. But I think all too often in our society, if a 90-year-old decides to do something dangerous, it's their choice if they are cognitively intact.
Yes.
And I think that, just to sort of set the stage for this discussion of how we deal with that, I think it's first important to recognize that we have to respect people's dignity and autonomy at all ages.
Yeah, you're right. They have a right to make their decisions, right or wrong.
Yeah, just picking up on what Mike is saying, I so agree, because I think one of the things that there's a tendency to do with the family members, caregivers who are well-meaning, is to infantilize the senior. And to begin to, and again, I'm assuming a situation where a senior is not so cognitively impaired or dealing with a disease process mentally, but does need help. And the biggest mistake is to make that assumption where I know what's best for you, and this is what has to be. And now you inject, and now we begin to see an agitated or annoyed or upset senior, and boy, that's another manifestation of what's wrong with them. Well, no, maybe they're reacting to us who are trying to oppose our will on what we think is best for them. So the key there is we must include the senior in the process, in the decision-making process, and approach that person with sensitivity, with understanding and respect, and come to a meeting of the minds on what might be a good direction to follow, whether it's healthcare or social involvement, or whatever the issue happens to be. It's got to be a team approach with the person that's the focus at the head of it.
Yep. Chapter 3, I haven't looked at my own book in a long time, is what your parents would tell you if only they could. And then chapter 2 is, are you becoming the parent?
Yeah.
And then chapter 5 is, I'll never give up my car keys, when parents resist change. And these are all opportunities. Family dynamics don't go away. As a matter of fact, what we find out is that sibling rivalries and grudges and resentments and all the like resurface as parents age. So there's going to be a family dynamic, and the tone with which we approach our siblings, the tone and respect in which we open a conversation with our parents about a sensitive, emotionally charged issue, is going to ensure its failure or its success. If we lead with making assumptions and being a bully and not showing that dignity and respect that you guys talked about before, it's going to turn into a power struggle. We're taking, instead of leading with compassion and empathy and saying, Dad, I can't imagine, what it was like. You've loved driving. Or Mom, I can't imagine what it's like moving out of the family home, with all the memories we've had there. Or, just simple compassion, empathy, and letting them air out and helping them, as we do our kids, consider all their options and hearing them out first, rather than the telling, the hovering, the disempowering adult child of an aging parent who tells their parent what they have to do, who leads with fear and with a tone of criticism and of over concern.
Yep.
And I think, we have to empower. Raising an aging parent, the word raising, which is so emotionally charged, it's raising them up.
Yeah.
It's empowering,
Yeah.
them rather than disempowering them. In the same way that we teach our kids learned helplessness, we can enforce a learned helplessness with our aging parents and brothers and sisters, or our aging selves.
The hardest thing I've ever had to do as a clinician is take the keys away, or tell the family to take the keys away. You mentioned the car, and that it struck a nerve, because it's one of those areas where when someone becomes unsafe to drive, it is a problem. But to your point, the approach I always tried to take was asking my patient how they felt if they knew that they might hurt someone else. And that usually got the discussion going in the right direction, so they could make their own decision and do the right thing.
Yes. Also, when we consider how the senior is feeling. Um, I'm reminded of my years, walking the corridors of skilled nursing facilities and seeing well-meaning staff and family members react so strongly because Mr. Jones or Mrs. Smith, they're not smiling. They seem sad. They're not happy today. And certainly if there's something that's persistent and there's a depression going on or something that needs an intervention or needs a medical intervention, we've got to do it. But we also have to recognize that this life is hard. And going through making an adjustment to all the losses, or living in a facility, or living without family, or living in a way that we have not been accustomed to, you know what? I might not be smiling all the time. I might have periods of feeling down. I might have to work through that and kind of discover my resilience with a helping hand, or a helping Zoom meeting, if you will. But in some way, I have to be allowed to have my feelings and to go through them, because we're dealing with a lot.
That is, for me, the single most powerful thing that creates loneliness is exactly what you just said, Peter. It's the absence of listening and understanding and showing compassion, because people often don't want to fix. They often don't need the problem to be solved. Maybe there's no solution for the problem, but what they want is, there's still nothing more powerful than the feeling of being understood, of being listened to, that there's at least one other person in the world who understands what I'm going through and that this is hard, and isn't afraid when I say, this stinks, or as the kids say, this sucks. That nobody runs around with their hair on fire, that somebody might even say, I understand. If it were happening to me, it would suck too. And that gives me permission to have my humanity, to have a human response, because out of that kind of understanding and feeling understood and feeling less alone come creative solutions, comes newfound strength, comes self-compassion, come all the things that allow us to somehow go on and figure out how to go on, and even do things that could help ourselves or help somebody else.
Yeah,
So I think our ability to listen, to really be present with one another without instant putting a spin or a quick fix solution. I think if the training that we do in senior facilities or in community centers and whatnot has to be, and with families, has to be centered around the capacity to show compassion, empathy, and understanding in most of these situations, understanding that some of them have gone past that point and will need an intervention.
Yeah, that's so important, Ken. I'd seen so many times, that's the irony of the healthcare worker. They would always, at least from my vantage point, the good nurse, the good CNA would want to come in and fix things right away. They would, Mike, you see this too. Well, the person's angry. He needs an antipsychotic, or he needs some medication. There's something wrong with the person that, when they can't fix it, they feel like they're failing. And that's your point, Ken, that, and Peter, we can't take those feelings away. We can't strip those feelings away, because it's taking their power away. So the more we can affirm how they're feeling, the more we can kind of acknowledge how they're feeling, even though we can't fix it. That's really crucial. So I'm noticing the time here, and I just want to get to this. What do you say to the family member who's worried about mom or dad or a husband or spouse about COVID, and the patient, the individual is just afraid of leaving the house, afraid they're going to die, afraid their world is coming to an end? How do we help those patients with those fears? What do we say to the family members, the caregivers?
Well, for me, I begin kind of with the point that we've been making. Start by validating the feeling that that person is having. Even if it appears that the fear is somewhat excessive or exaggerated, it's based in fact, it's based in the reality of the circumstances in which we find ourselves. So affirming that, validating it, and saying, kind of joining with that person, let's put our heads together to see how we can make it a little bit better. Maybe it might mean, if you have access to be able to step out to a porch and get a little fresh air. Don't push that person beyond that limit that seems to be too much based upon what they're describing or what they're saying. So essentially, it's a collaborative dance with the person that is experiencing the difficulty. Again, always falling back on being understanding, respectful, actively listening to what they're saying, and then putting some heads together to see what seems to be a small step in the right direction that will be somewhat helpful.
And I'm not sure that in the time of COVID, there's anything that truly is too much fear in terms of this. I think, so on one hand, outdoor visitation, I think there's an opportunity to let people know that outdoor interactions are far safer. So that'll help them feel a little more comfortable. And then at the same time, just the importance of having interactions on a daily basis. And even though it's somewhat off the realm of what we're talking about, it's really critical that folks exercise, that they're active, that they move around. And especially if they have access to the outdoors where there aren't people around. I'm really fortunate. I live in a neighborhood where I can walk around and, if anything, someone walks on the, one side of the street, I can move to the other side of the street. It's not a problem. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for folks to either get outside or to do activity and exercise indoors, because activity is absolutely critical as well to coincide with the social interaction and purpose.
I want to throw in that I think these are great ideas. And I think sometimes we need to realize we're not the best person. If you're an adult child of an aging parent and you're, or the grandchild, there's somebody else who's better to bring this up. You can have the grandkids get together and come up with 10 safe ways to see grandma and grandpa. Or you could say, Mom, would you be willing to, because she's not willing to talk with you about it. I won't do it. I'm not going to do that. What are you trying to kill me? But if you say, Mom, could I come with you to your next doctor's appointment? Sometimes there's a confidant, whether it's their estate planning attorney or their doctor or their lawyer, their accountant or their best friend or their younger brother or older sister. Sometimes there's somebody else who's better at approaching that conversation with them than you are. Right. And we need to be sensitive to know that there are things, and ultimately it's going to come back to mom or dad or brother or sister or whoever it is, or wife or husband. Would you be willing to let me help you think out loud about a few things that might feel safe enough to try? And like you were saying, Peter, to take those baby steps. And it sounds like, you're living that life right now, with a partner who has those vulnerabilities, and, and how you're probably the master of how to approach that in a loving, kind, patient way. And we all need to learn more how to be that way. And so that they feel safe and that they are taking co-ownership of it to try something out. Let's try it out. If it doesn't work and doesn't feel safe, we'll go back. We won't try, but let's at least be willing to explore the possibilities. And the other thing is, I think with my grandkids, I get tested every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks I go in. Do I have to? Is there any? No, I want to walk into my daughter and son-in-law's house and be with their twin boys, with them having the assurance that I got tested because they're quarantining, watching their kids for the most part, and they're able to do that. But that nobody's walking into the house who hasn't been accountable. I walk into the house, I wash my hands, I make sure that I'm not vulnerable, so that I'm not walking in there creating tension and danger. And maybe sometimes talking to an older person to say, what could I do to make me safer to be with you? Because I miss you and I want to spend more time with you. Might there be something that I'm not doing or that I could be doing more of that would make me safer to be with? And safer in residential community. Might there be something that I could advocate for you with the people who run your facility that would make you feel more relaxed and safer to be in a controlled environment or outside in community, or if there's an outdoor concert taking place at your, because I know a lot of the senior communities are trying to animate and activate something resembling normal.
Yeah, these are good points. These are all excellent points. The whole notion, I always like to talk about recognizing the positives, right? Because it's so easy to focus on what's wrong. The world is going through this virus, this terrible pandemic. I see it on the news, I see it in the newspaper. And it's hard to sometimes take those blinders off and recognize that there are a lot of good things going on too. And I think that's important for family members to recognize, yeah, mom or dad is having a tough time, but look, you're doing a lot for mom and dad. You're doing whatever you can for their home health. You're getting their appointments taken care of. So let's not just, focus on everything that's going wrong, the disappointments, the losses. Let's see that there are a lot of those positive things as well. But these are great ideas.
Breaking news because of the election. We've got,
Yeah.
This election and the political chaos in this country is causing as much anxiety as COVID and as much depression and distress.
Yeah.
And, I had to, my mother called me, I remember one night saying, she was in tears. And my mother was a very strong person who had really been a part of her community for years. And she said, the world is broken.
Yeah.
She was defenseless.
Yeah.
In watching breaking news, 10 hours of breaking news every day. And we have to be also mindful, talk about being positive, Joe, of that's not all that's happening in the world. And often the news channels are showing us the rough, raw edge of everything because that's what they're in the business of doing, is selling news. But there's lots of good and wonderful news in our community, in science, and what science is doing, and how people are showing up in each other's lives during this very difficult time and generously giving to one another. The world isn't all contentious and ugly.
Yeah, it is that adapting to change, adapting to challenge, and the tenacity and the perseverance that gets us through these things. I mean, we don't know what the answers are, but we have to keep pushing forward. So I really appreciate your participation. I appreciate your willingness to be a part of this discussion. A lot of questions, and we had some good input. We had some good insights for people that are going through this questioning time. So I thank you all for being a part of it, and hope to talk with you again down the road.
Hey, do you guys all want to go to lunch next week?
I love that.
Got a deal.
Wouldn't it be nice to live in a normal world again,
Yeah.
It would.
Pleasure being with all of you. And Joe, thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you, Joe.
Nice
You're all
meeting all of
welcome.
you.
Important conversation.
Glad to be a part of it. Thank you. Take care. Good night.
Good night.
Good
Good night. Good night.